One of the things that struck me about Joachim Lang's comments was that he said he put a greater priority on further development of the EU, and he put that above a closer relationship with the UK. I mean, are most German businesses really prepared to make that sort of sacrifice?
Well, I think, the way they're looking at this is that, look, they're already quite integrated with Britain, and there's some uncertainty about the value chain integration between Britain and Germany. But at the same time, they've actually been using Eastern European countries like Hungary and Poland, so the new EU members, as their manufacturing bases in recent years. So I think, that is really where they've been developing their business as well from a manufacturing point of view. And that might provide a little bit of a substitute for manufacturing bases in Britain.
But that really struck me as quite a striking comment when Britain is Germany's fifth biggest trading partner overall and its third biggest export market.
It is quite a striking comment, but I think at the same time, German businesses, perhaps just like politicians, are nowadays putting just a little bit more emphasis on unity within the European Union, given the recent political developments both here as well as in Europe.
Well, Nina, let me bring you in at this point. I mean, some people would say, well, hang on, Joachim Lang seems somewhat confused about Britain's negotiating stance. I mean, Britain has said all along what we want is frictionless trade with Europe.
Yes, but the thing about the German position is no cherry picking. They want a good relationship with the UK. They're cognizant of the fact that there's a tremendous amount of trade between Germany and the UK, but not if it compromises the single market. So you have very complex supply chains crisscrossing across Europe, and a market of 400 million consumers, if you're forced to make that choice, is more valuable than frictionless trade with the UK. And that's something that the German politicians, manufacturers and industry have been saying from the get-go, basically. So now what's made it even more difficult is the fact that we're 6 months into those negotiations, and the political turmoil means there's no clear direction from the UK as to what the transitional agreement's going to look like and what the final FTA is going to look like.
Some people would say, though, hang on a sec. Britain's been quite clear about wanting a trade deal all along, and it's the EU that's insisted on breaking up the negotiations and talking first about the divorce bill before we start talking about trade. I mean, shouldn't the BDI be lobbying Angela Merkel harder on this?
Well, that has, of course, been the argument that's been forwarded here, that, German car manufacturers would be lobbying Merkel hard, and that has not been the case. And the reason is because as soon as Britain triggered that Article 50 clause, the power went to the EU, and they specifically said, this is the way in which we're going to talk about these negotiations. We won't continue to the future trading agreement until we settle the items of the divorce. And you've seen a lot of unity across Europe amongst the 27 and with European businesses supporting that line. It's in their interest long term to make sure that the integrity of the single market and the European market with its common laws and institutions is not unraveling with a precedent for the UK.
Thomas, jump in. You're keen to say something there?
Yes, of course. I mean, I completely agree with this idea that really the single market takes precedence above everything. And I think, other than just sort of the manufacturing aspect, there's also an important labor market aspect. And that is clearly, if you look at surveys, let's say, of consumers or of people in Germany and other European countries, only 28% of Germans think that Brexit would be bad for the German economy.
Really?
Yes, that's right. But it's other countries like Hungary, Poland, Spain, or Italy, where a lot of people actually came to work here, which think it would have a much bigger impact on them. Because clearly, people may have to go back, the flow of remittances would stop. With weaker sterling, now they're getting less money in terms of euros. So all these things kind of matter, not just from the manufacturing, but also from the labour market movement perspective as well.
Have you crunched the numbers yourself? Have you sketched out the kind of scenario that Joachim Lang is talking about? What kind of hit that would be on German GDP?
So I think if you have a very hard Brexit, I mean, you've already seen an adjustment in net exports, in German net exports to the UK. So German net exports to the UK were 1.7% of German GDP at the peak, right before Brexit. Because of the sterling depreciation itself, now we're down to 1.4%. I suspect, and this is just a wild guess because there's a lot of uncertainties. We don't know how an exit would look like. But if there's an exit and if there's some sort of tariff or trade barrier, it could probably decrease quite a bit further. Now, this has not been a drag on the German economy because consumption there is doing very well. And it looks very likely, following the German election, that there will be some sort of fiscal stimulus as well. And that means next year we'll do well as well, which means that the sort of impact on net trade, which traditionally used to be a big driver of German growth, will be a bit less felt than it would have been otherwise, which again makes the negotiating position a little bit stronger.
And Nina, put this into perspective for us. I mean, how influential is Joachim Lang in Germany? Is he a big name?
He certainly is. I mean, the BDI represents over 100,000 businesses and employs over 8 million people. So the BDI is very, very influential. And the fact is that despite the rhetoric in the debate on this side of the UK, if you actually listen to what German politicians are saying, what German business is saying, they do not want a putative deal with the UK, certainly not, but they're very aware that the political turmoil here means there may be no deal. So they're preparing for that eventuality. They are going to fight for their own economic and political interests, and that you cannot mesh that with the current position of the British government. So it's not really surprising.
And do you think he is an isolated example, or do you think he is speaking for the broad mass of German? I mean, Thomas, that's an amazing statistic he's come up with there. Only 28% of Germans think Brexit is going to hurt Germany.
He's not isolated. I know, again, that whenever we talk about the German position, sometimes here in the UK they wheel out outsiders like Hans Olaf Henkel, who's an eccentric MEP. But the mainstream of German politics, business and the public is united that Brexit is far more harmful to the UK. And they also think that, yes, we want a deal, but not if we have to compromise some of our fundamental political and economic values. So that's their position. It always has been, and it will continue to be.
Very briefly, Thomas, and I've asked you this before, but I mean, is there any hope at all of Angela Merkel coming in and banging heads?
Well, I think Angela Merkel is the consensus chancellor. So she reflects the political consensus, not just in Germany, but also in the EU. And, very often when she says something, it looks like she's kind of steering the EU, but she's just reflecting the consensus, really. So I think it's unlikely that she's going to steer very hard to sort of soften any of the EU's condition on the UK in the negotiation.
OK, Tomasz Wieladek, Nina Schick, good to see you both. Thanks for joining me.